Welcome back to another episode of Barbecue in Bottles, and on today's brisket experiment, we're going to be turning this pellet smoker into an offset smoker, and then we're going to throw down this 20-pound prime brisket and see if we can get that Central Texas barbecue flavor that we've been looking for. So as we were editing these videos, we realized just how long these brisket videos take, and we realized some of you might actually want to just skip to the finish and see the conclusions. So we've got this table of contents right here with some timestamps. So if you're one of those people that doesn't want to watch the full video, here you go. All right, first step, we got to get it out of this vac pack. So we're gonna come in here on one end. We're gonna try and open this up just like a bag where we leave all of the juices still inside the bag, as opposed to just making a giant mess all over our cutting board with the juices that have come out of this brisket. Perfect. And you see, this way we've been able to keep most of the mess still within the bag itself. Now we'll just get rid of that, get some paper towel, and we'll get carving into our brisket. So now let's get trimming this brisket up. The first cut I like to make is just coming along this edge here and straightening that up. You can see there's going to be a lot of beautiful marbling under this. So what we want to do is just start down this end here and make a straight cut all the way down the brisket. Perfect. Now we've got all of that oxidized part of this brisket off. You can see on the point here, just a really beautiful amount of marbling on this brisket. All right, we've got the fat cat side up here now, and what we're gonna wanna do is trim this down so that we have about 1/4 inch of fat. Now we've got a ton of fat on this guy here, so it's gonna be a decent amount of trimming, but don't worry about it. Just keep your excess trimmings in a little bowl on the side. You can use this for stock, you can use it for hamburger chuck, you name it. You don't have to let any part of this go to waste that you're trimming off here. Now one other tip just as you're trimming is make sure that you're doing this while your brisket is cold. If you pull this straight out of the fridge, that coldness will keep the fat nice and hard and just make it easier for you to actually slice off parts of that fat without the knife slipping and potentially hurting yourself. So let's get into this carving here. Now the reason we want to leave 1/4 inch of fat on here is we're going to put this brisket on the grill fat cap down, because that's the direction the heat source is coming from. So the fat cap will act as a bit of a protective barrier, preventing our brisket from drying out. Now that we've got most of the fat cap trimmed up here, what we're gonna do is start to round off the corners of our brisket. So we're gonna start just cutting our brisket like this. And the reason that we're doing this is if you have any sharp edges on your brisket while you're cooking it, those will have a tendency to just burn. So you want rounded edges around your brisket, and that'll just allow for more even smoke flow around your protein and just a more even cook all around. Now you can see on the back side of this brisket here, we've got big chunks like this. You definitely want to be taking this off. Again, these flaps here, these are just going to burn away through our cook, and that's not going to be good for anybody. We want round edges just like this to the best we can all across the brisket. All right, now that we're done with the fat cap side, we're flipping it back over. Now you're gonna see a really hard white piece of fat here. It's called the decal, and this is not gonna render down at all through our cook. So we wanna take this piece off, because the last thing you wanna do is slice into a beautiful piece of brisket as you're serving it and give someone a chunk of this decal. Now as you're trimming up the rest of the top here, you want to get some of this silver skin off, get as much of this fat and silver skin off as you can. But again, remember, this is backyard barbecue, it's not a competition. So if you don't get all of this off, no big deal. This is the kind of fat that will render through your cook. Now we've got enough fat on the fat cap side, so we're not really worried about having that much fat here, but it's not the end of the world if you don't get it all. Now for this decal, we're still feeling that there's a really huge chunk of hard fat in here, and this is part of the fat layer that separates the point from the flat of the brisket. So we're just gonna get in here with our boning knife, carve out a little bit more of this guy. And this is where it helps to have a boning knife. So you can carve in here like this. So I think we're pretty much ready to go here. Let's flip this guy over. Just give it one last inspection. Look at that marbling. This is gonna be a really beautiful point on this one. We've got the flat here all rounded out nicely. So I think we're ready to start seasoning this up. And you can see we took off, this is probably 4, maybe 5 pounds worth of fat and lean meat as well. So again, don't throw this out, put it in the freezer, use it for burger chuck or stock. So now for our rub, and again, we're going for a Central Texas brisket here, so we're just gonna be using salt and pepper. Now our ratio is gonna be 2 parts pepper to 1 part salt. And because this is a pretty big brisket, we're gonna go in with 1 cup of pepper, and then we're gonna top it up with ½ cup of salt here. All right, now this is just a fine kosher salt that we're using, nothing fancy. And now we mix. And for the pepper, you want to use as coarse a ground of pepper as you can find, ideally 16 mesh, which is what Aaron Franklin down at Franklin Barbecue uses. I'm just using a coarse ground pepper here from Costco. That'll do the trick. We've used it on previous briskets and it's fine. All right, now that we've got that mixed up, we're just going to apply it to the brisket. Now what we're going to do today, we'll use a binder. And I just want to make sure that we've got that pepper sticking to the brisket. So we're just using a regular yellow mustard here. It's not going to change the flavor profile of the brisket at all. It's just going to allow this rub to stick to the brisket and make sure that we don't lose any of it through the cook. So we'll go in here on the fat cap. We just want a thin layer of this yellow mustard all the way around, get the edges. All right, now we're just gonna grab some of this with our hand and sprinkle from high up. And this sprinkling from high up is just gonna make sure you get an even coating of your rub all over your brisket. Now you don't want to be rubbing your rub into your brisket, you just wanna pat it down, and that's gonna prevent blotches of your rub just aggregating in certain spots. This will make sure that you've applied it evenly and it stays even on your brisket. Now to get the edges, we often just put our hand up against the edge, sprinkle the salt and pepper onto the side, just like that, and pat it in. We'll do the same over here. And really make sure you get the edges of your brisket as well. Now we'll flip over the brisket, and we'll do the same on the other side here. So thin layer of mustard. We'll go in with our rub. Now let's get this grill warmed up. So we're gonna turn our pellet grill to 225, and that's the temp we're gonna be doing the majority of our cook at here. And now I'm gonna get into the process of how you transform your pellet grill into an offset smoker. So on the inside of the pellet grill here, we've got an optional insert, which is just this metal tray here. Normally we've got 3 racks that go all the way across the grill top. And what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna load this up with a bit of charcoal. We'll get some logs on top of it. We'll put our brisket over here. And with that setup, we're gonna see if we can get this cooked to more resemble an offset smoker. So you'll see we put the brisket fat cap side down. That's to protect the brisket as the heat source from the pellet grill is coming up from the bottom. So that'll prevent the brisket from drying out because that fat cap will act as a protective barrier. Now we've also put the point closest to the firebox here because that's the fattiest side of the brisket. And so when it gets hit with a lot of heat, that fat tissue just renders down beautifully, and it'll still be a really nice, moist, juicy cut, as opposed to the flat over here that's a little bit more susceptible to drying out. Now we've got a half chimney of charcoal here, so we're just gonna dump that in. Now let's get this set up. We're gonna move some of this around here, and then we're gonna add in some logs. Just like that. Now we're hoping that this is gonna bring some additional smokiness as these logs ignite to the overall pellet grill and make this taste like our brisket was cooked more on an offset smoker. All right, this grill is smoking up a storm. I'm super excited to see how this turns out. Now, 2 things left for us to do. First thing we want to do is just put a log in here to really separate the heat from the brisket itself. This is gonna act as another protective layer between the fire that we've got going here and our cook. We're just trying to do this indirect. We don't want to be applying any direct heat, so this will just be a protective layer that helps us accomplish that. The wood that we're using, I should have mentioned, we're using apple wood. I ran out of post oak, so we're improvising here and going with some apple. We got to get our temp probe in. Now for our temp probe here, we're putting this over in the flat, so it's the thinner edge of the brisket, and we want to get that right down there into the middle. Now what I really like about the idea here is we've got charcoal, we've got wood over on this side of the pellet grill. The auger system is going to maintain the temp at 250, so there's less fuss than a traditional offset smoker because the pellet grill mechanisms itself that control the temp of the grill are working to maintain this at 250 to the best that it can. So we're going to go and check on this probably every half an hour just because we've got a live fire here, and we're gonna see how our brisket's coming along. We'll see if we need to add any more logs or whether the smoke profile's coming along as expected. Right, so that first setup was maybe a little bit too much wood, so we're going back to just having one log in here just so that this whole thing doesn't turn into a giant bonfire. So one log, we'll see how the smoke profile goes, and we'll add in more throughout the course of the cook. That's more of the controlled small fire that we're looking for, just like that. Beauty. Now you'll see we've pushed all the charcoal over to this side. We've kept this log, a smaller log here. And again, we're just trying to prevent this part of the brisket from getting too much heat. We've got a beautiful smoke flavor coming off of this. Really, really excited to see how this brisket turns out. Now our fire's burned down here. We're gonna get another log back on and keep this going. So we're an hour into our cook here. We're just gonna check in on the brisket. This is coming along great. You can see the bark starting to form here. It's feeling a little dry, so we're just gonna mist it. Now we're misting it here with a mix that's 50% water, 50% apple cider vinegar. We've just put that in a regular spritz bottle, and we're just gonna go around and make sure our brisket stays nice and moist and keeps a wet exterior here. Now we're just gonna check in on the wood. This is still smoking away here nicely. We'll flip that over, make sure we keep the fire and the smoke going. We'll close down the lid and we'll check back in another hour to 90 minutes. So we're just gonna check in here, see how things are coming along. We added a little bit more charcoal just underneath this log, and that's got this reignited here. We're generating a ton of smoke. Again, that's great. That's what we're looking for. We're at the 2-hour mark, so we're still just looking for color on the actual brisket. We're not expecting the brisket to be hitting its temp or getting into the stall yet at this point. We have hit 150 on the flat. So again, we've kept some good distance between the flat and the actual fire, so that's coming along nicely. We've been cruising along here at 250 Fahrenheit. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna hit this quickly with a spritz. I'm gonna wet the side of this wood here also just to make sure it doesn't actually catch fire. All right, now we'll close this down and let it keep going. So one of the comments we get most when we're doing pellet grill cooks is just that you're not getting the same kind of flavor profile and depth of smokiness as if you're using a traditional offset smoker. So that's really what today's experiment's all about. So we were just checking on the brisket. We're at the 4-hour mark in this cook, or 4.5-hour mark on the cook here. We've got a really nice dark bark that's forming. So we're gonna let this keep going. We're only at 155 on the temp here on the flat. So this has got a little ways to go before we get out of the stall, and hopefully we can keep building this rich black bark that's already forming. So what we're gonna do, we'll add in a little more charcoal here. Now we'll get out our glove, move this around a little, just to make sure that charcoal reignites. So we've had the charcoal that's starting to ignite here, we can hear it. So we're just gonna drop in one more wood chunk, another apple wood chunk. We'll let that ignite and let the smoke keep rolling. All right, we're at the 8-hour mark here on this cook, and the brisket's been hanging out at about 165 here for the last hour, so we're clearly in the stall. We've got a beautiful bark that's formed on this. I'm really pleased with the bark formation using this offset smoker technique. So I'm gonna get this guy wrapped up and we're gonna get it back on here. So let's take you over to the butcher's paper. So now we're just gonna get our brisket right in the middle of 2 pieces of butcher's paper like this. It's pretty windy outside, so it's handy to have a little bit of help. So all we've done is we've taken 2 pieces of butcher paper, put them side by side here, and now we've put this fat cap down. So we're gonna rotate the brisket once, rotate it again. You're trying to keep the brisket as tight as possible here. Then we're gonna fold this down in under. Perfect. So we've got our brisket here just like this, fat cap down. So we're gonna get this back onto the grill. So we've got this back on the grill here, and we're gonna get our temp probe back into the flat, and we want this to go in roughly the same place that we had previously. Now we took this off the grill at 165 internal, so we're just gonna make sure our temp probe hits a similar reading, and then we're good to go. I've been using Cuisinart's maple bourbon pellets here, and even though we're 8 hours into the cook, we still have a lot of pellets, but we're gonna top it up. This is a 30-pound hopper, so you can hold more than a full bag. Now we don't have to worry about running out of pellets over the last bit of our cook here. Close down the lid and we're good to go. Now that we've got the brisket back on and wrapped in butcher's paper, we've upped the temp to 275. We're really gonna start to push this guy because we're looking for a final temp here of about 200. So at around 195-ish, we'll start probing this with our temp probe for tenderness to see if it's done, but I think we'll probably be finished around 200 degrees. So a couple of points here. You'll see we've wrapped this brisket in butcher's paper and not aluminum foil. And that's really to prevent the brisket from just steaming away or braising away in the foil, because that's what the foil has a tendency to do. It doesn't allow any moisture to escape, versus the butcher's paper, it's a little bit more permeable. Secondly, you'll see that we've put the brisket back on the grill, fat cap down. Now as we finish off this cook here, we're going nice and low and slow, but that fat cap's gonna continue to render. And we don't want the fat cap up top with all those juices rendering down and just holding at the bottom of the butcher's paper to destroy the bark that we worked so hard to build up. That's why you want to keep fat cap down for the second phase of this as well. And now as for timing, I mean, we started with a really large brisket. This was 22 pounds. We probably shaved off 4 or 5 pounds worth of fat at the start as we trimmed up the brisket. And you want to be planning for about an hour for every pound of your brisket. Now this guy, we've put on the grill at 7 o'clock. We woke up at 5, started prepping for this video and started trimming the brisket so we could get it on really early. But I suspect this isn't going to be ready for a regular 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock dinner, but that might be the time that we take it off the grill, and then we'll have another 90 minutes to 120 minutes of the brisket just resting in a cooler before we slice into it. Just keep this in mind as you plan your brisket cooks. These things really need low temperatures over long periods of time, because the brisket, it's essentially the pec muscle of the steer, and that muscle does a lot of work. So there's a lot of intermuscular tissue that has to really be broken down over the process of a long, low and slow cook. So that's something to keep in mind again as you're planning. Just plan for long cooks here. And some people even start their briskets the night before. You know, they throw them on the grill at 1, 2 in the morning and then grill through the night. Especially on a pellet smoker, that's something really simple to do because it'll just maintain temps for you through the night. But you know, you have a couple options. You can use a pellet smoker and do something like that, or just wake up nice and early and tend to your brisket over its entire cook. All right, we've just hit an internal temp here of 198. So now what we're gonna do is just take a temp probe and we're gonna check for tenderness. Oh, so what you wanna do is just probe in here and make sure there's no resistance. Now we've taken a few spots here. There is absolutely no resistance on this, so it's time to take this off and we're gonna put it in a cooler to rest. So the other thing you can do to check for tenderness is just pick up your brisket and just move it around like this, and you can try and bend it, and if it bends reasonably easy and it's got some of that flex in it, you know this has been cooked long enough. I'll put it down in the cooler here. Again, we'll let that go for about 90 minutes, and what this is gonna do is just allow the brisket to relax. We've had it at between 250 to 275 here for the better part of the last 12 hours. It's 7 o'clock right now. So this guy just needs to relax before we slice into it, and that's gonna make sure that we get a really tender, really juicy brisket so that when we cut into it, juices aren't just going everywhere. So we've had the brisket in here for 90 minutes. Oh yeah, that smells incredible when you open up the cooler. All right, so now we're just gonna unwrap this guy. So on this cook, I am super pleased with the bark that we got. I think we got that really dark black bark that we were really looking for in terms of replicating what you get using an offset smoker. So that was a fantastic part of this outcome. Now we're gonna slice in. We've got our serrated knife here to carve this up. Just look at that, beautiful. We'll carve in here. Really nice and juicy and tender. Just look at that. We're gonna carve into the flat. Now for the flat, just gonna take this first little tip off here. Now I'm gonna carve off little slices that are about as thick as a pencil. All right, so let's take out one of these slices. So this is definitely a clapper. It's passing the bend test. We've got a beautiful smoke ring, that wonderful bark on the outside. Let's see if it just pulls apart. And it's pull apart tender here. Wow, that looks really, really good. I'm gonna snag a little piece, get some of this juice that came out as we were carving it up. Wow, that is really good brisket. I'm really pleased with that outcome. This might be my go-to going forward here. But now, let's carve up a few slices of the point and see how this turned out. So you can see with the point here, the crust or the bark that was on this side was actually a little hard, and that's just because it was right next to the actual fire that we had going in the pellet grill, so that wasn't ideal, but we still have a really nice moist point cut on this side right here. So that's the piece I'm gonna taste. Let's try that out. It really is an enhanced taste profile when you get the smoke from the real logs like that in the charcoal. I really, really am pleased with the flexibility this Cuisinart grill has, where you can co-fire your pellet grill with charcoal or wood like that. And taking another bite. So before I eat this entire brisket, we're gonna have to get it inside so we can share it with the rest of the family here. But I'm super pleased with this outcome. I love the richness of that extra wood smoke and the charcoal smoke that we had. I think if I was to do this again, I wouldn't put so many logs in at the start. We had some really high heat on one side of the grill that just charred the one side of the brisket, maybe a little bit more than we were hoping for. But otherwise, this was phenomenal. Beautiful bark, beautiful smoke ring, great taste profile, juicy, moist, past the bend test, pull apart tender. just love cooking briskets. So if you like this video, give us a like below, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll see you on the next brisket experiment. Thanks for tuning in.